Process in the two I have cited, I could have cited, for instance, when you get a vaccination, it's the same thing. When you get a vaccination, you produce an antibody, which is a molecule, against an antigen, which is the one you want to block. That is also a phenomenon where the antibody you create must recognize that antigen, which is a given sickness, for instance. And so this is called molecular recognition. And this recognition process needs, of course, binding, physical forces to hold them together, but something very important also, which is very well, of course, developed in India, information technology. These molecules that do information technology, they recognize each other. You cannot recognize if you don't have information. So obviously, specific molecular interactions require information. The most simple way to express this information is, on one hand, that the geometry must fit together, and also that the interactions, the physical forces, must fit. The simplest way of representing it, which was already proposed in 1894 by a German chemist called Emil Fischer, it's a very nice image. It is, of course, not totally correct. It's only geometric, but it is important to realize that it is a fit like a lock and a key. The molecules have to fit together. And when you have the right key, you can not only put it into the door, but you can open it. So you can induce a function. And here is Monsieur Emil Fischer. He got his PhD in Strasbourg, so we're happy about that. That's a very important progress he made. But he didn't propose this idea in Strasbourg. He worked on something else. He was in Munich later on, and where he proposed this idea of the lock and the key, Schloss and Schlüssel. Now let me just illustrate that by one example, which is probably the most important of all examples of molecular recognition. We sitting here are defined by our genome. All living organisms are defined by their genome. What is a genome? Something trivially simple. A genome is a long string of information written by just 4 letters. And these 4 letters are 4 chemical groups. This one called A, adenine. For those who are not chemists, I remember A. This one called guanine, G, thymine, T, and cytosine, C. And this is a long strand of these sequences, A, G, T, 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 C, and so on, all this, and this makes the difference between a tomato and an elephant. But the same letters, the same chemical groups, write the information for all living organisms. Now this is the storage of information, which then later on gives to this famous double helix. But you have to read the information. How do you read it? You know the answer here. Binary, 0, 1, 0, 1. Except that it is not 0, 1, 0, 1. The interaction between adenine A and thymine T, or uracil, is by 2 points of interaction, represented by these dots. These are supramolecular interactions. These are molecular residues. And this entity which forms when they interact, their recognition comes in. This is supramolecular. Guanine interacts with 3 bonds to cytosine. So the difference is just 2, 3, 2, 3. And that's the way you read the genome. So you have a very, very, very long sequence of letters. And these letters, you read them out by 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. And this is the way it happens. Now, when you look at it, I mean, it's trivial in some way. But of course, as it continues, it becomes more and more complex. This is a long step which we don't understand yet. And finally, it ends up with somebody like us sitting here. So one may say, and I claim it, and since we have also physicists sitting here, that chemistry is not only a science of matter and energy, but also an information science. And probably, let's say, of course, biology, which is the highest expression of molecules, is the most complex information science around. All what the computers do is peanuts compared to what this thing does. After all, from atoms, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, comes out Einstein. That's not a minor process, I would say. You agree with that, I guess. So the storage is molecular, the storage of the energy, of the information, and the reading and processing is supramolecular. Now, where I am. Where am I? Now, I also wanted, I had already indicated that science has been questioned by a number of people because they say, all right, there are risks. And in particular chemistry, of course, has led to an increasing fear about the risks science may generate. But as you know, zero risk does not exist. Zero risk is a dead world. And risk appears with life. As people say, the most dangerous place in your apartment is your bed, because most people die in their bed. So you have to see what is a risk. To eliminate risk may become a threat to freedom and to democracy even. The desire to systematically eliminate risk may lead to the elaboration of vast sets of regulations, which usually are anyway inefficient or insufficient, but they very strongly hinder our freedom of operation. Of course we have to have regulations, but we also have to take into account the fact that there are many things we don't know, and so there's always a given risk at some stage. We have to minimize it, but we cannot eliminate it. And attempts to eliminate risks are attempts which are first doomed to not to work out, but also will stop the possibility to make further progress. When Pasteur first experienced vaccine, rabies vaccine, it was done in conditions which nowadays he would be in jail, Pasteur, if you did it that way. It could not have worked. That would have been a big problem for us, because if the vaccine of Pasteur had not worked, vaccines would have been invented anyway, but much later. At that time, you could try it because there was nothing else. And nowadays also there's this thing we can sometimes in the drug industry, one can do what is called compassionate use, but you try out something because the person has no other chance anyway. So the person has to accept, like for instance in cancer, terminal states, there are molecules which you don't know really, are they good, are they not so good, but you have found on animals that they may act, and then you ask, would you like to try it, or would you not like to try it? So at that time, of course, this compassionate use can lead to lead to the possibility of using it. But of course, risk is something we have to deal with. We have to optimize the chances and minimize the risks. There is this famous principle called the Precautionary Principle, which France, in a very incredibly stupid move, inscribed into the Constitution. Chirac wanted that. I was very strongly against. Introducing the precautionary principle in the Constitution is something I personally cannot accept. For me, the precautionary principle is something like that. You want to cross the street, okay? If you are cautious, you look left. Here you look right first, and then you look left. Well, there's no car, no truck, nothing, and you cross. If you apply the precautionary principle, you never cross the street. Because there might always be a truck you haven't seen which might kill you. Okay? Doing nothing can be much greater risk than doing something. For instance, should we ever have invented the wheel? Of course, the wheel is something which comes progressively. You can see that. These are these two people having just been in the process of inventing the wheel. It's not yet perfect, but the state of the art, and progressively we get better and better. But of course, you have to be careful. You have to assess the risks. First accident. You make a wheel and it crashes some poor fellow there. So, but maybe we should never have invented the wheel. Sorry, you don't see what is written below. Written is below. Why should we invent the wheel? There are slaves who carry things, so you don't need a wheel. Which solution do you want? You want to have the risk of car accidents, or you want to carry your things this way? Without a wheel, there are not car accidents.